Let my people go. Exodus chapter 2, verses 4 through 31. And God called Moses from the burning bush. He called in a still small voice and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses listened, and he answered and said, Lord, here am I. And the voice in the bush said, Moses, draw not nigh, take off your shoes, for you're standing on holy ground. And Moses stopped where he stood, and Moses took off his shoes, and Moses looked at the burning bush, and he heard the voice, but he saw no man. Then God again spoke to Moses, and he spoke in a voice of thunder. I am the Lord God Almighty. I am the God of thy fathers. I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. And Moses hid his face. And God said to Moses, I've seen the awful suffering of my people down in Egypt. I've watched their hard oppressors, their overseers and drivers. The groans of my people have filled my ears, and I can't stand it no longer. So I'm come down to deliver them out of the land of Egypt, and I will bring them out of the land into the land of Canaan. Therefore, Moses, go down, yes, go down into Egypt and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses said, the Lord, who am I to make a speech before Pharaoh? For Lord, you know I'm slow of tongue. God said, I will be in thy mouth, and I will be thy tongue. Therefore, Moses, go down, yes, go down yonder into Egypt land, and tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses, with his rod in hand, went down and said to Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go. And Pharaoh looked at Moses. He stopped and still looked at Moses and said to Moses, who is this Lord? I know all the gods, lowercase g, of Egypt, but I know no God of Israel. So go back, Moses, and tell your God that I will not let this people go. Poor old Pharaoh, he knows all the knowledge of Egypt, yet never yet knew. He never knew the one and the living God. Poor old Pharaoh, he's got all the power of Egypt, and he's going to try to test the strength, well, the might of the great Jehovah with the might of the Lord God of hosts, the Lord mighty in battle. And God sitting up high, up in his heaven, laughed at old poor Pharaoh. And Pharaoh called the overseers, and Pharaoh called the drivers, and he said, put heavier burdens still on the backs of the Hebrew children. Then the people chode with Moses, and they cried out, look here, Moses, you've been to Pharaoh, but look and see what Pharaoh's done to us now. And Moses was troubled in his mind. But God said, go again, Moses, and you and your brother Aaron, and say once more to Pharaoh, thus saith the Lord God of Hebrews, let my people go. And Moses and Aaron, with their rods in hand, worked many signs and wonders. But Pharaoh called for his magic men, and they worked wonders too. So Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not let God's people go. And God rained down plagues on Egypt. Plagues of frogs and lice and locusts, plagues of blood and boils and darkness, and other plagues besides. But every time God moved a plague, old Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not, he would not let God's people go. And Moses was troubled in mind. Then the Lord said, listen, Moses, the God of Israel will not be mocked. Just one more witness of my power I'll give hard-hearted old Pharaoh. This night about midnight I'll pass over Egypt land, and in my righteous wrath will I pass over and smite their firstborn dead. And God that night passed over. And a cry went out of Egypt, and Pharaoh rose in the middle of the night, and he said in a hurry for Moses, and he said, go forth from among my people, you and all the Hebrew children. Take your goods and take your flocks and get away from the land of Egypt. And right then, Moses led them out with all their goods and all their flocks, and God went before them, a guiding pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, and they journeyed on in the wilderness and came down to the old Red Sea in the morning. Oh, New Hope family, in the morning, they missed the Hebrew children. 400 years. You heard it right. 400 years. They'd held them down in Egypt land, held them under the driver's lash, working without money and without price. And it might have been Pharaoh's wife that said, Pharaoh, look at what you've done. You let those Hebrew children go, and who's going to serve us now? Who's going to make our bricks and our mortar? Who's going to plant and plow our corn? Who's going to get up in the chill of the morning? And who's going to work in the blazing sun? Pharaoh, tell me that. Who's going to do it? And Pharaoh called his generals, and the generals called the captains, and the captains called the soldiers, and they hitched up all of the chariots, 600 chosen chariots of war, and 2,400 horses. And the chariots all were full of men with swords and shields and shiny spears and battle bows and arrows. And Pharaoh and his army pursued the Hebrew children to the edge of the Red Sea. Now the children of Israel, looking back, saw Pharaoh's army coming, and the rumble of the chariots like a thunderstorm. The whirling of the wheels was like a rushing wind, and the dust from the horses made a cloud that darkened the day, and the glittering of the spears was like lightnings in the night. And the children of Israel all lost faith. The children of Israel all lost hope. Deep Red Sea in front of them, Pharaoh's host behind them, and they mumbled and grumbled among themselves, were there not any graves in Egypt? And Moses wailed aloud, and they wailed aloud to Moses and said, slavery in Egypt was better than to come to die here in the wilderness. But, O Moses, said, stand still, and see the Lord's salvation, for the Lord of Israel will not forsake his people. The Lord will break the chariots. The Lord will break the horsemen. He'll break great Egypt's sword and shield, the battle and the bows and the arrows. This day he'll make proud Pharaoh know who is the God of Israel. And Moses lifted up his rod over the Red Sea, and God with the blast and his nostrils blew the waters apart, and the waves rolled and stood up in a pile and left the path through the middle of the sea, dry as the sands of the desert. And the children of Israel all crossed over on to the other side. And when Pharaoh saw them crossing dry, he dashed on in behind them. Old Pharaoh got about halfway across, and God at last the waters and the waves rushed back together. And Pharaoh and all of his army got lost, and all of his hosts got drowned, and Moses sang, and Miriam danced, and the people shouted for joy. And God led the Hebrew children on till they reached the promised land. And listen, my dear hearts, listen, all of you sons of Pharaoh, who do you think can hold God's people? The Lord God himself has said, let my people go. Let my people go. Let